Hey there, it's Dak, coming at you again with another edition, this one talking about stat changes in 4.0. Now we know with any new tier of content, any major expansion, there's going to be some uncertainty as to what to expect. And so here I'm trying to present forward some of the things that I found and some of the things that I'm theory crafting in terms of the way stats are going to work. This disclaimer is none of this is definitive. This is just me using deductive logic and putting forth what I think is going to happen. So now first things first, we can talk about the way stats are currently. Now as we know, if you look at all the sets of gear, you have armorings for the vast majority, and armorings have an endurance slot and then a main stat slot. If you move into mods, you have endurance, main stat, and then your first rating slot. Then moving into enhancements, you have endurance, your first rating slot, and your secondary rating slot. Some people refer to this as your secondary stats and your tertiary stats. And as we move into 4.0, there's going to be a few sweeping changes. The first, most obvious change, mastery. Mastery is going to replace willpower, strength, cunning, and aim. And when I look at this change, I think to myself, it's a relatively smart change. I think it's a positive change. It does simplify gearing your tunes, but what really is good about it is it opens the door to legacy more gear to more tunes. So you're going to get more mileage out of your alts quicker. You don't need to have all these different sets of gear because you have a sniper and a commando and a warrior or whatnot. Basically, you get your one set of gear for a DPS tune, your one set of gear for the tank and for the healer, and hopefully when it comes to the set bonuses, they'll transfer across. There's no guarantee that that's going to happen, but that would be nice. I'm just hoping that your set bonuses will transfer. But if not, at the very least, it'll give you a start to have the base gear so that you can raid with various tunes. It does open the door for that, which is going to be very nice. So mastery in itself is not going to really have a huge impact on the game. It will bring some quality of life changes. It will make all the datacrons relevant, and those are good changes, positive changes, as I said before. But now moving into what's happening with your first rating slot or secondary stats. Absorb and critical rating are no longer going to be available for the first rating slot. They're moving into the second rating slot, which means, if what the devs are saying is true, that all the mods will either be power or defense, that you will no longer see absorb mods, you will no longer see critical rating mods. Those will only be on enhancements. And so this makes gearing DPS very simple. All of your DPS are going to have the main stat power mods. That's how you're going to gear DPS, because you're not going to put defense on a DPS tune or a healer. Healers and DPS are going to use the power and main stat mods. That's going to pretty much simplify that altogether right there. Now when you move into your second rating slot, which is on the enhancements, you now have more options, right? So you're going to have absorb, critical, shield, alacrity, and accuracy. Those 5 stats are all competing in that slot. Now based on your role, it's going to be very straightforward what you're going to be stacking. If you're a tank, shield rating. I'm guessing that shield rating is going to be with absorb, hopefully still. That would make sense. But if you're DPS, you're going to be stacking accuracy. Accuracy and power, most likely, is how that's going to work out. Accuracy and power, you're going to stack that until you get hit capped. And once you're at 100%, you can start looking at critical rating. Critical rating is now going to directly compete with alacrity, it seems. And I think the vast majority of people are going to be preferring to take critical rating over alacrity with the new changes. There's no sure definitive way to know yet what the meta is going to be, but my guess is critical rating is going to be the new meta. Well, the new meta when directly competing against alacrity, at least. I don't see how these changes are going to make Alacrity any more attractive, especially when those precious few slots you have left are going to be reserved for critical rating. There could still be some builds out there which I'm sure will be viable where your augments are predominantly Alacrity, but I'm sure some tunes are going to need to use up some of those spots in critical augments. I would think some of the more crit heavy DPS specs like Innovative Ordnance, Assault spec, um, a lot of the dot specs that are more crit dependent would need to use those augment slots for critical rating, but we'll have to see how that pans out. And I think as we've come to know, as it's been throughout the game's history, Alacrity will always be viable for healers. That shouldn't change much. Most of the Alacrity versus critical tug-of-war back and forth is going to directly correlate to DPS, but for healers, you stack Alacrity until you feel you're not getting any good returns, and then start looking at critical rating will probably be how that pans out. And then when you look at implants and earpieces, they've always traditionally had the endurance main stat, secondary stats or the first rating slot, and tertiary stats or the second rating slot. That's always been there, and I don't see that changing at all. So for implants and enhancements, that should stay relatively the same, except that the stats will be rearranged a bit there. And when you look at what the devs are doing, it seems like they're trying to streamline the stats, make it easier for players to know which stats to take, but also I think it is to control some of the more radical builds that players can come up with that they may feel might make classes or builds too powerful. It makes it easier for the devs to balance the game if they're more in control of how you gear your tune, and I think that has a lot to do also with what they're doing with the changes to the stats. And so this has been a basic overview of what I feel the stats are going to be, which direction the devs are going in, and what we can expect in a relative sense, and what's going to happen. Of course, it's not definitive. We don't know for sure until the game launches, but thank you for watching.